So a few years ago, there was a study conducted at Princeton School of Theology. A group of graduate students were told they were to give a talk across campus on the Good Samaritan. And half the class was told they just had 10 minutes to get across campus to deliver the talk to the undergraduate students. The other half of the group was told they had a couple hours. Well, all the students were directed to walk past a particular route to go to the other side of campus, where they would encounter a volunteer who was struggling for breath on the stairwell, fallen, clearly in need of help. And the students who knew they had a couple of hours' time to get across campus to give their talk on the Good Samaritans, 62% of them stopped to help. 38% didn't. And of the students who knew they only had 10 minutes to get across town to give the talk on being a Good Samaritan, only 10% stopped to help. And you know, there's part of me that wants to chuckle at that story, but there's a part of me that recognizes myself in that story. Out of curiosity, in this room, how many of you were raised in a Christian background? I find that interesting. I ask that question periodically just to check here at Celebration Circle, where we are an interfaith community with a creative approach to spirituality. Year after year, the vast majority of us were raised in a Christian home, but are seeking a more inclusive way to tell the story of how to be the Christ, a Christ in the world. A Buddhist Christ, a pagan Christ, a Christian Christ are all called to Christness, that place where the human meets the sacred. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus the Christ was not a Christian. He was a good Jew. He was a rabbi. And he was about the business of telling his fellow Jews they needed to get back to living their spirituality rather than living the rules about spirituality. He was about the business of identifying with a force greater than this earthly realm in order to build a more compassionate world. That's a shorthand, that's my version. I'm no biblical scholar, that's how I read the Bible. Jesus was a profoundly unpopular man at the time he was born. And I bring up the story because this is the first Sunday of Lent. It just feels important to point to the suffering in the world, how many people are crying out in pain, and how we, you and I, as born-again Buddhist, pagan, Christians, whatever our faith, we're called to translate the idea of our faith into action. Toward the end of his ministry, a few weeks before his death, some of the Jewish authorities were getting pretty upset about this man who was overturning money-changing tables in the temple and calling people to stop worrying about the rules of their religion and start living the spirit of it. And a group of Pharisees tried to entrap him, tried to trick him into saying something wrong for which he could be tried. And one of them was a Pharisee who said, so of all the commandments, what's important? What are you teaching here, Jesus? And Jesus answered famously in the 22nd chapter of Matthew, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And the second commandment is like unto this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, the important thing is to love God, but the way to translate that bigness, that ephemeral feeling of God, is to bring it into loving your neighbor as yourself. Two tricky parts to that assignment, loving yourself and then loving your neighbor as yourself. But I have a problem. And I'm guessing it's a problem you share with me because we live in the same culture. And that problem is that you and I are hardwired to be compassionate, to care about others. For hundreds of thousands, some would say millions of years, we evolved as a species, as herd animals, living in relatively small herds called tribes, called villages, called clans. The vast majority of human, for the vast majority of time, lived in communities of a few dozen people. And even when cities started to become a thing, which is relatively recent in human history, less than 2,000 years, which was but a blink of an eye in evolutionary time. Even when there were cities of a few tens of thousands of people, and people were living in neighborhoods, and were still being called to care for each other. It was important to care for each other because everyone lived at the very cusp of survival, day in, day out, year after year. There was a question of would there be enough food? Would we be able to protect ourselves from the enemies? How many people would die this winter of flu? And every year people died of flu in the winter. It was a given. They didn't have medicines, they didn't have grocery stores, they didn't have insurance policies. They were living at the cusp of survival, and it was mandatory that people in these small groups would care about and for each other. They needed each other to survive. Fast forward to 2023, and you and I, here living in San Antonio, live in a community of about 2 million people in a planet with a population of over 8 billion people, and we are connected by the miracles of modern technology and the internet so that we are asked to care about 8 billion people. Day in, day out, we're bombarded by images of people suffering, not just in Uvalde where they were being shot, but also in Michigan where they're being shot, and in Germany where they're being shot, and not even start on the war in Ukraine, which is awful. And so is the war going on in Central America. Let's not even talk about how many faces that war lives. The war in Iran, the war in Turkey, the war in Afghanistan. Oh, the genocide in China, and the genocide in Burma, and the list goes on and on. And then, because we're bombarded with the images of all these people we are hardwired to care for, we are bombarded by images sent to us by an entertainment and communications industry which knows very well that we are hardwired to care, and preys upon us with tens of thousands of each of us, whether we think we're watching much TV or not, whether we think we're spending much time on our cell phones or not, are being bombarded with over 20,000 disparate images, asking us to pay attention to something over there, over there, over there, over there. So, we're being bombarded with requests to care, and we still only have our one small human capacity to care. Moreover, we're all busy, just like those Good Samaritan students. We're busy. They had important lectures to give across the campus in only 10 minutes. You've got to get to your job. You got to take care of the kids. You gotta. Who's got time to really care about others? And yet we do. And so, for just a minute, I'd like you to join me in breathing into the fact that you do care. The breathing into your divine heritage as a sentient being with the capacity to move beyond yourself in consciousness, to think into the future. With eyes open or eyes closed, feel your willingness in this place, in this safe place where you are right here, right now. Feel your willingness. In your own way, speak to the higher power of your understanding and speak your willingness to be a difference maker in the world at the feeling level now. to feel your willingness to slow time simply by taking a breath and remembering you are more than just your physical self. You are a metaphysical self. You are more than just Rudi or Sheila or Eduardo. You are Sheila the Christ, Eduardo the Christ, Emily the Christ, Mark the Christ, called to bear witness. And from this place of remembering, totally separate from theology and good ideas, I ask you to call into your heart the image of one you love who is suffering. Maybe a partner, maybe a cousin, maybe your neighbor, maybe something you saw in the news on your way here this morning. Bring into your heart the image, the feeling of one who is suffering, and breathe in their suffering. Take it into yourself as a sponge might absorb water. Take in the suffering of the one and breathe out love and compassion. And don't just do it once. Repeat the cycle. Breathe in love. Breathe out love. Breathe in love by way of absorbing the pain and suffering of the other, not to take it on as your own, but to help another carry it. And then breathe out love. Not with the intention to fix or change anyone. You can't stop another's suffering. You can't cure another's cancer. You can't fix a dysfunctional relationship your loved one is in. But you can send love. And breathe in suffering. And send love. And feel that you are not doing it alone, that you are one with all of life. All of life is breathing through you. All of life is absorbing the suffering of this one and sending love to this one with you. Do not think it is a superpower of yours. It is a superpower of ours as divine beings. So just feel that. And then just let it go. Just let it go. And come back to this moment, this body. This wondering when this guy's going to be quiet, have more music here. Just come back to this moment and feel what it is to be present as a loving being. This little process I taught you is based on an ancient Buddhist practice called Tonglen, breathing in suffering, taking on the suffering of others, and sending love and compassion. Compassion coming from the Latin word passiore, meaning suffering. Come with, suffering with another. On my way here this morning, I got a text from one of my brothers saying that one of my younger brothers is being airlifted to the hospital in Lubbock. He's had a recent heart surgery and something's gone terribly wrong. He's got pneumonia. Part of me wants to pray to God, please fix Arnold. But instead, in my life, I find it more powerful for me, rather than wishing something over there, fix something over there, breathe into myself that place that has room to hold my beloved brother Arnold and his suffering and his fear and his very real physical pain and a very real and very expensive helicopter ride. All of that is real, and I can breathe into the reality of it while remembering the truth that Arnold is more than a body, and I am more than a body, and he's not over in Lubbock, We're in this together. There's but one of us, one presence, one power, everywhere, at all times. So too, I know that for me, I don't know enough to know what's good for Arnold. I don't know to say, God, please fix his heart. What I do know is that Arnold and the children who got killed in Uvalde and their parents who survived and living with the grief, and the people who are suffering in Ukraine are all part of something much bigger than my conscious mind can understand. And that their pain and their suffering is much bigger than anything I can fix or change. But that all of it and every part of it and all of us and every one of us is connected to a greater power, a greater force, which is love, which is consciousness, and which we can affect with our hearts and our willingness to bear witness to that love and to bear our part of what is to be born. And yes, it's much easier to say, much easier to talk about than to do. I know that. But that's why we gather together, to remind each other of our powers, and that we're not alone, that we're connected to a great mystery that none of us can define, and all of us want to be open to, or by definition, or we wouldn't be here this morning, right? Each in our own way, we're seeking to share our part in this great mystery unfolding. So, that's the warm-up. Wind up, all of that was the warm-up. Now let's move into a group process together. Again, with eyes open or eyes closed, as my friend plays some music for us. Let us sink once again into simply being present in our bodies, in our breath, just as we are. Take a moment to contact not your breath, but to digest your breath. Not just to feel your heart, but to be your heart. And to lift up once again a prayer, a commitment, just a word of willingness to be of service to life, to open yourself to a place of deep connection to all that is. And from this place, breathe in the very real suffering of the world. All of it. The horror in Ukraine. The children in Central America, Turkey and Iran, Iraq, China. And not just the humans, but our two-legged, four-legged, winged brothers and sisters who are also suffering in a world of rapidly changing environment, climate. Breathe that all in and breathe out love, compassion. And if your mind drifts off to other thoughts and fantasies, as minds will do, simply come back to the moment, come back to the heart, come back to your willingness to breathe in suffering and breathe out love and compassion. Again and again at your own pace. Breathe in the suffering. Breathe out compassion, your willingness to suffer with, your love, your blessing. perhaps even more difficult, take a moment to breathe in your own suffering. Suffering at work, perhaps a physical suffering in your body. And breathe out compassion. Feeling that you are not separate from the suffering in Ukraine or Uvalde. You too are worthy of compassion and love. And from this place of openness and softening, in your own way, won't you lift up a prayer of commitment, of your willingness to do this again tomorrow, to help where you can physically, to practice this practice of breathing in suffering and breathing out love and compassion. Releasing a world of either or and breathing a world of both and. May you, may we, may all beings be blessed by our willingness to do this today, tomorrow, and all our tomorrows. And so it is.